I want to bring in my man though. I am joined with the man himself, Koffi Kouakou. Koffi, how you doing, my man? Before we get started, you doing all right today? And Koffi, I can't hear you. I think you're muted.
Yes, I was muted. Sorry.
There you are. There you are. How you doing, my man? You doing okay?
Well. Doing well. Very busy week in South Africa. Two really important events. The first one is basically the Minister of Finance, the G20 Minister of Finance meetings that's ending today.
Yeah.
And then, of course, South Africa, as you know, is a host of the next G20 summit in November.
Is it?
People, yes, very frantic. The U.S. is playing ball with South Africa. President Trump is behaving strangely. It looks like he may not come. So you've got all kinds of representatives trying to placate this whole thing. But I think more and more South Africa is now understanding that, look, you've got to do without them. If they don't come, that's also okay. If they come, that's also okay. But key to it is that next year, the United States is hosting that summit. So there should be a handover. But that's very interesting. So it makes things happen nicely. The second most important event is that, strangely enough, we had a shocking news from the minister in the president's office, by Mrs. if not Miss, Kumbuzo Ntshabeni, announcing that there were some kind of people plotting a coup d'etat in South Africa. My goodness.
Really?
And, yes,
I didn't hear this one.
Yeah, a little bit confusing. There's a little bit of psychosis. People are worried that this news is not really helping. Of course, it's not also helping with the preparation of the G20 summit in November.
Right.
Now people are saying, oh my goodness, there's security issues, what's going to happen? So there's a bit of confusion. People are very worried. But this happened in the back. Also, another news that the police commissioner of a province called KwaZulu-Natal, down in the southeast of the country, last week just made a bold announcement. I mean, another shocking news that the national police minister called Ntunu, was implicated with syndicate crimes and criminals. My goodness, this is what we have. And so the president had to come rushing from Brazil to remember the BRICS meeting there, to come back and try to settle things. But people are not happy. People are not happy about the news, how the president really spoke for somewhere like 10 or 12 minutes. And he came late, didn't apologize. So the country is a little bit of the knife's edge. Commentators are up and down, and people are saying that the president is not bold enough in the decision. Instead of firing the minister, he put him on what's called a leave of absence. One of these terminologies that said, you're not going to come to work. You're going to be off while there's a judicial commission looking to these allocations for the next 3 to 6 months. You get paid to relax. And the salary of a minister is a really nice package.
Yeah. Before I get into the Sinhalese thing or the cynical thing, I am super curious about the Democratic Alliance and the ANC. How has that been working out? Because, look, I told you I thought it was a nose in a camel's tent. I thought that the ANC, under no circumstances, should have allowed the white party to ingratiate itself into, let's say, the political space, if it could help it. But I do understand that the ANC was losing support. Give me your take so far on how that has worked out, this unity government has worked out.
I agree with you. Most darker side people think was a bad alliance to put together, because people are still, imprinted with the legacy and the memories of, white supremacy, hegemony, and then, the oppression. I mean, it's a terrible regime, Jamal. Yeah. And sometimes there's the part of that, the specter sort of hovers around, especially on economic areas and so forth. And that kind of alliance, which is called the government of national unity, in fact, people say it's not quite a national unity. However, much that people were worried but we're looking at it with cold eyes. Some of us were observing it. We may not like what we see, but it's managed to really, at least the Democratic Alliance, it managed to pin down the African National Congress on many areas, especially on the budget. That was a big one this year. And they're not yet done. Really keeping a tab on how this government is spending money, wasteful expenditures and so forth, and justifiable wealth enrichment and so forth. I mean, there's a part where there's racism, but also there's a part where you got to deal with the real day-to-day issues, right? And people are saying no. But this alliance has been holding not quite steadily, but the DA smartly locked itself in and made sure that they now understand that they have a bit of power and they don't want to relinquish this till the next elections. And they're right, their strategy seems to be working, although they're sort of, pissing off everybody who is looking at this new government of national unity as some kind of potential success. But we are concerned that the NC is in decline. The NC is, almost nothing seems to work for the NC. And the old rhetoric of, racism and other things, really, people are struggling to make ends meet. They're saying, look, deal with our real problems: unemployment, extreme poverty, inequalities, crime, and then, of course, corruption. And these are the things people want to see. And then, of course, the crimes, gender-based violence, people are getting killed about. I think the numbers are saying 64, 67 people killed across the country every day. That's a large number.
You mean the white genocide?
No, in general. And people are waking up to the fact that, my goodness, the NC, struggle for this country, but they're falling into that same sort of curse, if I may call it, where, liberation movements really don't end up well in the end, because they were just there to liberate, but not to govern effectively.
Give me your take on something. I met this guy in Kenya, and the guy did not like Mandela. He did not. I was blown away, because in America, Mandela is just kind of this kind of icon. And, it's like you're in Africa. And so obviously, like, he's going to have a different take just because of a different upbringing and everything else. And his argument was that Mandela gave up too much when he took power. And, if you look at, let's say Bernie Sanders, for example, regardless of what Sanders wants, and let's say he was a true believer in what he wanted, the mechanism, the machine itself has limits. So inevitably, Sanders would have came up against a limit where either you change the mechanism of the machine itself, or you're stuck with what you got. Yeah. And is that what we're seeing for the ANC? That all things being equal, regardless of what they wanted, they had a structure that they were working in. It's kind of like in Burkina Faso, where they just smashed the state. And it says, we are making the state what we need the state to be. And that is what we're going to make it. Well, South Africa never did that. You never had that opportunity. So the state was the state. Is that?
Yes. South Africa's papering over. So the guy you met in Kenya had a point. Because, Mandela was limited after having spent 27 years in jail, away in isolation for so many years. And the world during that time has evolved and gone so fast. Many of the things that were really in familiar term were really overwhelming to him as well. But he did his best. So he was sort of a handover type of president. And then he could be there to what we usually call in the old days at the World Bank, sort of a stopgap president. Right. You're there, you count people, they don't destroy everything. But the ANC missed that stopgap. They didn't manage it well. And they lost the opportunity to really make very serious fundamental structural changes in the economy. And so they were advised by some really wealthy, obviously white billionaires who said, look, if you want to transform this, create something called Black economic empowerment. So you put a few people, maybe 5,000 to 10,000 people, or maybe more, who get a bit of $1 million, And the rest millions,
Trickle down.
62 or 50 millions are still struggling. So structurally, they missed that boat. The land issue is still up there. They're struggling to make a case. And the worst part is that the leadership that's been deployed to really make the mechanism of the states and the government work are just failing across the board. Municipalities are run by people who just don't understand how to run them,
Yeah.
and they just keep failing everything. The roads, infrastructure, water is not working properly, electricity didn't work well. There's still, now it's become very expensive. So some of these basic needs are not being met, I would say. The basic needs of the Maslow hierarchy: food, shelter, and things like that. And then more and more, those kind of stresses are moving about and then forcing people's behaviors to behave badly. Crime is up, corruption is also up, and people have to find ways to survive that are
Mhm.
really legal. And so you can explain that by seeing how the system is not choking people in a way that they feel like, look, this party hasn't delivered. We want a completely different thing. We've enjoyed President Mandela's time, but he's given too much away. And those who are supposed to manage his succession have failed to do so. And this is where we are now.
That's unfortunate because that's not easy. It's like you're
Yeah.
coming out of jail and you're given the mechanism of state. And it's like, okay, do you really know how to use the mechanism of state in a way? It's almost like it takes a huge amount of time for you to figure out what the problems actually are.
It's painful.
Um, yeah, right. But at that point, now you're in a regular governing structure, and it's
Mhm.
like you're losing your political support. Yeah, that's a tough one. That is a tough one. I mean, do you see, is there any potential for anybody, let's say in the political space, to not smash the state, but to change the state? Or is it too late? You have to deal with the tools you got currently.
I think there may be people in the shadows who are not showing up at this stage. But what we're seeing roughly on the surface is really not encouraging. I mean, you got a new opposition party now. It's called the Conto Sizwe party, which is now led by the former president Jacob Zuma.
Yeah.
And they're managed to really worm themselves out in a very short amount of times. And they've done well in the past elections. However, there's signs where you got to sit down and say, wait a minute, the guy shows up in parliament in military fatigue, right? And
Really?
yeah, that sends a signal that, well, they want some order, they want to organize. I don't know what it is, if they want to scare people off or whatever it is, but those kind of signs are not quite good for most people, because this is sort of a country founded, at least a new country, post-apartheid, founded on what's called democracy, although the democracy is not delivering as much as it should. But people have at least some kind of rights. They can speak, they can say things that they couldn't say before, they can have jobs they try to have. But it's still tough because the system is so choking,
Yeah.
especially economically. And so hopefully, and people are saying, wait a minute, we want change. But the old guards were sitting there, especially we're hearing that the brother-in-law of the president, Patrice Motsepe, who is also the head of the African Football Federation, wants to come and become president. So he's been sort of sending signals and sort of lobbying to position himself. And people are saying, wait a minute, this is not a family business here. You guys
Yeah.
already been, the president is a billionaire. The brother-in-law is even more billionaire than the president himself. The families are millionaires. So what else do you want? You've been there for all this time. You haven't shown
Man.
any real progress for people. And we are living in a very tense environment right now. And people are depressed to a large degree, but you have to make it. You have to find a way to survive.
It's the trick of democracy. Like
Yeah.
it's speaking of that,
Mhm.
Ibrahim Traoré. So this came out for Burkina Faso.
Mhm.
Burkina Faso's quote unquote junta to dissolve independent electoral commission. I am fascinated by the way we look at Burkina Faso. Because as you will have this conversation about South Africa, you'll be very plain like, dude, it freaks people out when you're walking around in military uniforms. This is not
Mhm.
what this country is. But when we look at Ibrahim Traoré, we look at them and says, good job. You can walk around in your military uniform. You can smash the state. We accept you to smash the state. That's okay. Now, I get the reason, because the democratic system that was there in place was purely used as a cudgel in order to maintain the system, not to allow progress. And so this was their way of trying to find, we can't make it through under the context, or in the context to which the state currently operates. We have to smash the state. And in his case, he seemed to actually be doing good things for the population. So yeah, he may be a junta, but it's a junta that is actually trying to do something good. I don't know, it's just interesting the way we look at this. Did you come across this? They've effectively planned to scrap the Independent National Electoral Commission, making the point of saying it costs too much money, and more to the point, they believe that it allows foreign influence.
Yes, it indeed it does. In fact, those mechanisms of democracies have sort of, to a large degree, hampered the economic development of these countries, because the structures are funded from outside. I mean, how do you run a democracy that's funded by the European Union, or the USAID, or Finland or France, or the African Union's budget is 2/3 funded by the European Union? I mean, it just doesn't make sense. That's not a democracy. It's a paid for. So now what these countries, Burkina Faso and Mali and Niger, and probably a bit of Chad, are trying to do is to find a way to sort of to find the sovereignty that they themselves can fund. And they have the resources to do so, Jamal. It's just that, as I was saying to you, the elite in these countries are so subordinated to these old powers that they can't live without, thinking. I mean, we're going to talk about it a little bit later, that they have dual citizenship. They have a French citizenship, and then they have one in Senegal, or they have one in Cote d'Ivoire, and then they have another one in France. So that dual citizenship, we don't know where your allegiance is really, but for the most part, many of them have really big homes in France, in Paris. I mean, they go shopping there with their families, they send their kids to there. When they're sick, that's where they go to hospitals. I mean, all these subserviencies are telling us that, in fact, these democratic tools are not being used to help people, because the elite controls them. And the elite are also controlled by other people from outside. So people are saying, no, we don't want them anymore. It is a terrible thing to hear that you have military people running the country. However, people are saying, if those military people or officers can help us get the basics right, create some order, clean up the place in corruption, and also in crimes, and making sure we can be healthy enough, we're ready for this trade-off. We want something that works for us, and that nobody comes around and telling us how we should behave or pick our people or our leaders. And this is where it's going. And it's going to come to many of the African countries. So this piece that's there, closing the Independent Electoral Commission, most of the time, most of these places are corrupt. They don't have, the electoral lists are not clean enough. So the president may have a point, Traoré may have a point. Perhaps they need to put them on hold for a while, clean them up, and make sure that they're run correctly.
He's effectively a Napoleon of sorts. When Napoleon comes through, gets rid of the fluff, this is the way we're going to do things, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah. Let's go to Senegal. We have about, we have a little bit of time. So you made the point of saying, so the Electoral Commission was being paid for externally? Is that why he brought up saying this is expensive?
Yes, in part. I mean, not only is it's paid by people outside, but he doesn't have any control over those funds, you see. And the people who are being paid are acting on behalf of these people from outside. So what does that mean? There's no sense of impartiality. What are they running? What kind of integrity they're managing? And people are very suspicious because they can stuff the ballots. They can do whatever they want to do at the behest of somebody else outside. What do you do when
are you telling me that the Electoral Commission paid externally can stop a voting process and the president will have no say-so?
But if the president himself is bought by people outside, he uses the Electoral Commission to justify his position. And that's what we've seen, especially we're now almost about to see the same case in Ivory Coast, where the president is now, I mean, he's running an electoral commission. The electoral list is just
Yeah.
unbelievably corrupt. There's no integrity. People who were born 100 years ago are still there voting. I mean, it's too complicated to really get into it, but it's not a clean electoral list. And of course, he's sort of banned the opposition leaders. But a couple of days ago, well, he's been in France for a couple of weeks now, and the French, for once, President Macron is just squeezing him out to say, I really want these before we meet. And he put his foot down, and then they met, but there's no clarity and no assurance that President Ouattara is going to behave and then allow the opposition leaders to come in and run for president. But he himself wants to run for a fourth time. He's already illegal, but he still wants to run. He's in his 80s, but he still wants to run. He's not in good health, but he still wants to run. And apparently he's supposed to be announcing that on August the 7th. And the country is in a tense moment. You can feel it. People are talking about it in the streets, on social media, in the news media as well, and everywhere.
Let's go to Senegal. France is being kicked out of another country, supposedly, on the overt sense, anyway. And they're saying withdraw. Okay, they're being kicked out. Just like they were in Chad, just they were like in Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso. And, you know, as you point out, this is these countries effectively taking over sovereignty. It says the French military handed over Camp Gale, or Gale. It's the largest base in Senegal, along with nearby air facilities and a Senegalese government during the ceremony in the capital, Dakar. They point out that the French decision to end permanent military bases in the West and Central Africa responds to the Senegalese authorities' desire to no longer host permanent foreign forces on their territory. Good for them. Good for them. Is there anywhere, well, go into this though. You pointed out when I brought this article to you, you said, yeah, kind of. You were very clear. He was like, I don't buy it. These guys are kind of captured.
Yes, and you got to remember, Jamal, this is AFP or AP, Agence Presse, which are basically French type, or I wouldn't say that they're corrupt, but they're writing in a way that really gives a feel to people that something is happening, the French are leaving, but it's not true. The news that French has withdrawn its military presence from Senegal may sound, like a historical turning point.
Yeah.
But, Jamal, when we dig a little bit deeper, we see a different picture. What's being presented as a full departure, in fact, is a careful choreographed, rebranding. The last few paragraphs, in fact, I was telling you that piece of AP article, make it clear, in fact, the French forces are not fully gone. They're changing uniforms, becoming long-term military advisors, switching to called, cooperation mission. The terminology and the language is a bit different, and relocating their bases here and there, cutting down on staff, and then, to more discrete forms. But as I say again, this is not the need, the end of French military dependency. It's a misplaced and an undesirable, as I would call it, mutation. And in fact, let me close with this one. France's presence in Africa has never been solely about, security for Africans and for itself. But since independence in the 60s, those military bases have served as, anchor points for economic extractions and pillages, political manipulations, and then, of course, geopolitical leverage by France with the West. And those bases in Senegal, Cote d'Ivoire, Gabon, and Djibouti, for that matter, and even other bases in the Pacifics, were part of the original, sort of what people are now calling the Faustian Pact or bargain between France and its former colonies. So in closure, I would say this, but, what is really even more disturbing is how deeply embedded this system has become, not just in infrastructure or military bases, but in the mind of our elites, right? Who are often, as I said again, they're this French, dual French identity, and then also in their countries, and they operate in a sense of loyalty to Paris, and then to the French oligarch, and not to their people. And then what we're dealing with is, I would call it a psychology of subordination, not just a question of military logics.
Wait, dig into that for me. You mean just because the French have been there for so long?
Yeah.
I guess kind of like the way Europe is with America. It's like, daddy, come back. Daddy, don't go. Don't go away. Like, where they have this kind of weird vassal status that they accept,
That's right.
like wholeheartedly accept. Like, they just don't even want to give it up. When I was listening to Canadian radio station, and the way they were talking about the United States, and I was like, why are they talking this way? The US doesn't talk this way. Like, the US doesn't say, hey, we're going to see what Canada does. We don't talk that way. We don't care what Canada does. Nobody, no, those are words never uttered on any radio station ever in the United States. Nobody says we're going to see what Europe does. Nobody does that. But that's the way they were talking on the radio station. Like, well, we need to see what America does, and we're going to work with America, and we're going to do this in America, America, America. It's very strange. And I guess your point is,
yeah.
Oh, please.
So that, yeah, it's deeply ingrained, that psychology of subordination. Sometimes many of us who are the product of these colonial places found ourselves behaving strangely as well. We're like, wait a minute, why am I quoting, a French philosopher, Camus as this in French, or Balzac, or any? I mean, I've been going through my own sort of decolonizing my mind, and it's just so traumatic, because the basis for the benchmarks that I had before have all disappeared. And I'm like, what do I know really? Not only about these people, but about myself, about the history of Africa, history of my own, families and so forth. So it's really a very, very tough one. However, there seems to be a new era of that the era of blind subordination is ending, both individually among people who are educated and finding things, learning on the internet and so forth, and connected with networks of rebellions and so forth, that in fact the departure of French troops, well, according to this article, real or symbolic or imagined, is just one piece for the sovereign puzzle of Africa. And of course, what is important is the only permanent military presence of these troops in Africa that Africa should host. It's their own, not any other places. Or it's saying NATO is coming down, or the African command is going to, pitch up and then help you sort your problem. They're never going to do that. And this is where we're going. That's the new era that's not creating the friction that you see. The French are very uncomfortable. They're still reorganizing themselves. They're positioning themselves one way to still control the elites that are still subservient to them. And that is what's creating the chaos, the tension, the trauma. But we all know that usually before the great birth, there's always something that just has to give up.
Yeah. I mean, I still look at it as positive. I mean, it's Africa effectively taking back sovereignty. And that stuff, it is traumatic, as you point out. It's not something that happens overnight. It's something that happens kind of over time in these kind of fits. Koffi, man,
yeah.
I am always fascinated.
Senegal is the beginning, right? And this is where that journey is taking on, Burkina Faso, Mali, Niger, Chad, and even Central African Republic. They're trying their best to sort of come out of this yoke, the French yoke and Western colonization. It's not easy, because the mold within which you're working is what's made you. So true liberation will mean that more than waving goodbyes to foreign troops, it means building a continent that doesn't really fall for that subserviency, but also takes into account, that it doesn't have to be feared. And there will be, as they say, but when you want to make an omelet, you're going to have to break an egg. That's what we're going to go through. And it's going to be painful, as you say, but we're hopeful that things will happen.
Sahel states, I mean, they did break some eggs. I mean, they literally smashed the state. And there were other states in Africa that were concerned that the same thing was going to happen to them. I mean, they literally said, this doesn't work for us. The system, the way this operates, this is not in our best interest. I mean, they literally destroyed the state. And so I don't know how other countries, and maybe this could be the last question. How do other countries see that? Like when they look at that and they say, okay, we're uncomfortable with a military hunter taking over. By the same token, we can acknowledge that Ibrahim Traoré is doing good things for Burkina Faso. How do they balance those things?
Well,
Because
people
it
are
is
seeing it.
uncomfortable.
Yeah, no, it's uncomfortable. And people are seeing it that, they're not understanding that, wait a minute, sovereignty is not just military. It includes economic, cultural, and technological other sovereignties involved in it.
Right.
So if we can start with some order, to start to build this African strategic autonomy, starting with some order, discipline, organizing things, making things worse with the military, because that's where there is a little bit of power. Because if they don't have that strength, any other foreign country will come in and then just sort of disrupt everything. So if you can start building from that, and people are now, civil society, people are now getting the message. I mean, I'm sure you've been paying attention. Last month, there was some kind of really revolt and protest in Togo, in West Africa there, another small country. But also in Kenya last month, where people were saying the 1 year anniversary of the protest. And people are now slowly waking up, and it's going to happen. But don't forget, as you and I have been talking about this for a long time, and when you were at Sputnik International, that these colonial people, agents, and then the oligarchs are not going to give up so easily. They have the intelligence networks, economic ways to control tools and so forth. They're using money to do that. They're using also bribery. They're using coercion mechanism like they're doing now in the United States with your Congress and Senate. So they still want to implant themselves. So the fight is going to be on. Slowly, it's going to happen. Also, I think many African countries are now partnering with others like Russia, China, perhaps even Iran and other groups to be able to sort of find a way to defend themselves. And that is secure to start with.
Koffi Kouakou. Koffi, he is Africa Analyst, Senior Research Fellow for the Center for China Studies at the University of Johannesburg. Koffi, man, I always appreciate this. I always learn something when you come on the show, man. Thank you for this.
You're welcome. Thank you.
You have a good one. Be safe.